Warning! Spoilers for the middle and end of Destiny 2 Forsaken's campaign. You've been warned. Let's talk about Gambit. While I love all of the new single-player content that has been added in Forsaken, one of the things that really caught my eye back during the reveal was the announcement of a new PvE/PvP hybrid mode called Gambit. The mode has a pretty simple premise. Two teams of 4 compete against each other in separate arenas in a bid to score 75 points, or motes as they call them, by killing waves of enemies. When you hit 75, the final boss called the Prime Evil spawns, and the first team to kill their Prime Evil wins the round. Teams play a best of 3 to determine the winner of the entire match. I've gotten a few matches in with this game mode now, so I think I have a decent grasp of it, and it's actually super fun. While I just explained the general premise of the game, the details are what make it pretty engaging. So you pick up these motes as you kill enemies until you hit 15, and then you're maxed out until you bank them at a tower in the middle of the arena. You can bank the motes beforehand though, if you need to, and usually that's the case. This is because certain tiers of motes, 5, 10, and 15 I believe, allow you to send something called a blocker to your enemy's arena. Basically, when you summon a blocker, a taken enemy spawns in your enemy's arena, and their tower is locked until they kill the blocker. The higher the tier, the tougher the blocker that spawns. This particularly comes in handy in conjunction with the other enemy delaying mechanic, Invasion. So at some points in the match, a portal opens up in your arena that allows you to travel to your enemy's arena for a set amount of time and fight them directly. While this is most useful during the Prime Evil phase, as killing your opponent heals the Prime Evil, it can also work earlier in the game. A pretty basic strategy works like this: just deploy a blocker and then invade the enemy. If you time it right, then you can really piss off the other team. See, if you die while holding motes, you lose them. So if you happen to block them and then invade when the other team has a lot of motes and you kill all of them, then you just set them back quite a bit. These two mechanics cause matches to be really tense sometimes, as a team with similar skill can be constantly blocking and invading you while you do the same to them. Any game mode that causes me to be on the edge of my seat is worth playing in my opinion. I didn't want to dive too much into Gambit at this point though, so I went back to the Tangled Shore to take on the 8 Barons and then move on Uldren himself. A quick note about gear in the campaign though. This is probably the first time that I've run into something like this, and it felt odd to do. Basically, my advice for playing this campaign the first time is forget about your legendary gear pre-Forsaken. With the new infusion system in place, you're going to be trekking back and forth to every planet in the game to farm resources to infuse all of your old gear, and trust me, that would take forever. It's a much better idea to simply equip all of your blue armor that drops, as it'll be a higher light level than what you have, and try to make do with the blue weapons as well. I'll admit there were a few that just made me go, oh fuck that. Particularly the hand cannon. You can't really go back to a blue hand cannon after having the better devils, really. I also made excessive use of the bow and arrow weapons that dropped, guide me senpai, as it's one of my favorite weapon types and it's super powerful in this game. So from a broad perspective, Bungie did a very good job of differentiating each Baron's boss battle. With the exception of one that I will talk about in a few minutes, you can't really approach these Barons just by spamming them until they die. They aren't super spongy or anything, they just have unique abilities that make them harder to deal with than your typical Fallen Walker or Red Legion Colossus or Hive Ogre. Each boss requires you to figure out their patterns and exploit them. Rather than talk about all 8 bosses though, I'd rather just touch on my top 3 and why I like them the most. The Rider. The Rider was the first boss fight that I tried. The bulk of this fight is actually done while on a Scorn/Fallen hover bike called a pike. Basically, it's like the Fallen got jealous of the Guardian Sparrow bikes and made dangerous MacGyvered sparrows just out of spite. I don't think that's really the story behind it, but that's what I choose to believe. This mission is broken down into 2 parts essentially. Part 1 is hunting the Rider's gang for info in the hub world, and then part 2 is the showdown in the Rider's domain. Unlike Fallen pikes found on Earth, these Scorn pikes leave a trail of fire wherever they go, and that comes into play during the fight with the Rider. This fight is designed so that you can't just tail the Rider the entire time while you spam from behind. Additional Scorn are also constantly spawning, which requires you to multitask a bit. Thankfully, your pike respawns, and you can fight without it if you want. Guide me, senpai. Damn straight! The Trickster. I knew I was in for a treat even before I actually found the Trickster. I was in the part of the mission where you're still just tracking the Trickster, and I saw an exotic engram that just drops from killing a random enemy. Well, that's nice of Bungie. They did give me an exotic randomly during vanilla.
It's rigged to blow.
I'm never trusting you again, Bungie. This is a neat mechanic though, as it's used to blow up specific things like a fabricator or a door. The door one is actually pretty fun, as you're racing against time to get to the door before the fake engram explodes. Then you finally run into the Trickster, and predictably the game drops some heavy ammo because you're gonna need it, and son of a! The final showdown with the Trickster isn't exactly super difficult, but it does make good use of the fake ammo and engrams. You have to make sure you shoot the fake ammo while grabbing the fake engrams to throw at the enemies. It adds some complexity to the fight, but ultimately you do take down the Trickster somewhat easily. Still a great mission overall though. The Machinist. This mission lets you use the tank. I could just stop there, but there's a lot to like here. Instead of just getting into the tank like you do in vanilla, you actually have to search for 2 parts for it while getting shot at by a lot of enemies. Once you finally get it working, you blast through and it's on. Instead of having tanks spawn every few minutes like in vanilla, there are just healing pads placed throughout, so you have to be a bit more careful with it. This is a nice way to bring some of the fun parts of vanilla back, but with a slightly different twist to it. Then we get to the fight with the machinist. The actual flow of the fight is pretty simple. You shoot the machinist fires a volley of missiles and you have to sprint to avoid them, rinse and repeat. The difficulty kicks in when more and more enemies spawn in to try and stop you. You're basically fighting all over this arena and constantly moving until you defeat the machinist. Again, not super difficult, and I kind of wish it was more difficult as it is one of the last boss missions in the game, but I still enjoyed it a lot overall and felt sufficiently challenged. Then we get to the assault on an awoken watchtower in the Tangled Shore, which leads to the confrontation with the final Baron and then Uldren. You'll recall that I mentioned one boss fight kind of devolved to spam, and that is the fight with the final Baron, the Fanatic. I beat the Fanatic pretty quickly by just beating him down with my ult and shooting him in the head over and over again from behind cover while occasionally dodging his AoE attack. This is really the only fight that I felt was way too easy. The Fanatic is built up to be this badass and is visibly larger and more intimidating than the rest of the Barons, yet he gave me the least trouble. Anyway, we fight through the Awoken Watchtower, but don't make it to Uldren in time to stop him from opening whatever it is he's trying to open with what I believe is a crystal from the Shard of the Traveler? Not sure, but then this happens. Well, someone's been watching Attack on Titan. Well, I didn't see that coming. Uldren gets eaten by a taken anus with teeth, and then it's our job to kill the taken teeth anus called the Voice of Riven. During this fight, I couldn't stop thinking that the idea of not getting our revenge would be a bit of a dick move on Bungie's part. They literally advertised this expansion as the fight to avenge Cayde 6. You mean to tell me we're getting a bait and switch at the last minute? Oh wait, never mind, he's alive somehow. Yeah, after we beat the Voice of Riven, Uldren's just on the ground, seemingly fine. Not sure how that happened. Regardless, you get your scene where you face down Uldren with Cayde's gun alongside Petra. Then we get this line from Uldren.
Funny. The line between light and dark is so very thin. Do you know which side you're on?
You know, I hope that actually goes somewhere because that could actually be pretty interesting. The idea of a Guardian not being the good guy in reality has a lot of potential. The ending actually leaves it ambiguous as to who shot Uldren, so that'll be pretty interesting to revisit. Hopefully. Don't let me down, Bungie. So that's Forsaken's main campaign. I guess next time we'll take a look at this new hub world called the Dreaming City. See you then.